So how do you actually solve SAT transition problems? Believe it or not, I genuinely believe that transition problems are some of the hardest reading questions you're going to see on the SAT. But thankfully, solving them is actually not too complicated. The process is pretty clear, and if you just follow it on every single question, sure, sometimes they'll be really hard, but most of the time you'll just be able to solve it fine without any problems. If you want to know why you should trust me, I've personally scored a 1550 super score on the SAT. I also currently own the largest online school community for the SAT, and I've helped hundreds of people improve their SAT scores before. Now, here's the thing with transition questions. If you don't know, I do these live streams on this YouTube channel. And the thing we've been doing is doing SAT questions until I miss one. And it's always a lot of fun. It's always like really intense because every single time I do a question, I'm like, will this be the one that I mess up on and have the stream completely end because of it? And you definitely should check it out if you haven't before. But it's worth mentioning going into this that I believe at least 3 out of the 5 streams that I've done so far as the time I'm recording this, I lost on transition questions. The reason why I had to end the stream was from a transition question. And now this isn't because I'm terrible at transition questions. More so, it's just because transition questions on the SAT, at least for some of the really hard ones, are the kinds of things where really it's going to look like there are 2 answers that are both correct. So how you should think about this is learn the strategy for these questions, understand them as well as you can. But at the end of the day, it's the kind of thing where really you have to do a lot of practice to make sure you don't fall for some of these traps. And if you haven't done as much transition practice, you may struggle on some of these more complicated question types, just like I have done. But I mean, I typically get transition questions correct. I mean, I've got a 760 on the SAT reading section. I'm not often getting transition questions wrong. It just, sometimes they can be really difficult. Now, just as define a transition question is something that looks like this. You have 4 choices that are all of these different transition words, like however, likewise, consequently. And they typically appear after the grammar questions on the SAT. So about question 20 to 25 of the reading module, you're going to see these. It always kind of varies how many transition questions there actually are. There sometimes are a lot, sometimes there's only a couple, but there should always be at least one. The process for solving them is as follows. First, you read the passage. If you've seen some of the videos on this channel, I have this very specific way I recommend for reading passages on the SAT. And basically that is, you read each sentence, and after you read the sentence, you basically summarize the sentence in your own words before moving on to the next sentence. And you have to do this every single time you read a sentence. Otherwise, you're probably going to get confused and the sentence is probably just going to get kind of jumbled up in your mind. So let me do this on this passage here. A neighborhood group predicted that replacing a 4-way stop with a roundabout would reduce minor collisions at a busy intersection. So basically, instead of having like this 4-way stop here, we're going to have a roundabout, and that's going to make it so there's less car crashes at this intersection. That's the summary for the first sentence. Blank, police reports found that the following year showed a slight increase in fender benders. Okay, so basically it was the exact opposite. They found there are more car crashes when they did stuff. So the exact opposite. And that brings me to step 2, which is you have to make a prediction for what you think the correct answer is going to be. So think in your mind, what kind of transition word would make sense to go in the blank between these 2 sentences? And you should do this even before you look at the choices, because here's what's often going to happen. If you look at the choices first, you're really going to get confused. You're really going to look at a word and think, oh, that looks like a great word for this sentence. In actuality, though, you may just be looking at a random word that's meant to trick you. You really should make a prediction on your own before even looking at the choices so you don't get tricked by these terrible choices that you end up seeing. I'm pretty sure at least one of the questions that I missed for these live streams, I missed because I skipped this step. So definitely do not do that. So I would guess that it would be a word like however. However makes sense here because it's basically saying a contradiction. It's saying first this, but then this. So however is what I would guess here. And then finally, just look at the choices and just see which one matches. Now, this is probably the hardest part of the process for many people because you have to really make yourself not, go for a choice that just seems a little bit better in the moment if it's not what you predicted for the answer. This is often how you're going to mess up these questions when you just see a word and think, oh, that word seems like it could be a great idea, when in actuality, it just does not work. You're looking for the best possible transition, not just a word that theoretically could work. So in this example, we have however as a choice, so I can pretty easily just go for it and select that. Now, you may be asking yourself, how do you know all the different transition words that could theoretically show up? Well, I have this list here of these 8 different types of transition words that can appear on the SAT, 8 different categories. If you want this document, check the link in the description to join Mission 1400 Plus. This is my full SAT Skool community. I have a 7-day free trial on it, and you can access this document in there for free. So there's 8 different types. First is what we just did, contradiction. This is basically just when a sentence says something in the opposite, in a different direction from what you would have expected it to say. So I had a great day. Nonetheless, I lost millions of dollars. So, however, nevertheless, on the other hand, this is definitely the most common thing that you're going to likely see on the SAT because it just works so well. Contradiction, we see it everywhere. 2, cause and effect. This is pretty obvious as well. Basically, one sentence causes the other one to happen in terms of its logic. The sun was out today, therefore it was hot as frick. So these are words like thus, accordingly, hence. Then we have specification. This is a little bit more interesting, but basically it's just saying that the second sentence gives an example of the first sentence. Many animals have developed unique ways to survive the cold. For example, the Arctic fox has a thick multi-layered coat of fur and can lower its heart rate to conserve energy. So it talks about how these animals have found interesting ways to survive, and then it gives a specific example of an animal that has done so, the Arctic fox. Specifically, for example, to demonstrate that is restating. This is where it gets maybe a little bit more confusing, but all this is saying is that the second sentence just is another way of saying what the first sentence said. The company is letting you go. In other words, you're fired. You're fired is just another way of saying that they're letting you go. In other words, in conclusion. Emphasis. This is when the second sentence really wants you to focus in on one specific part of the first sentence. So it emphasizes something. He is a talented musician. Indeed, he can play any instrument he picks up. So it wants to make it seem like he's not just a talented musician, like he's an extremely talented musician. Like he can just pick up any random instrument and just immediately start playing it. Indeed, in fact. Sequencing. This is when one sentence just happens after the first sentence. First I chopped the vegetables, then I added them to the pot, then or afterward. Agreement. This is when the second sentence says something that just has a similar idea as the first sentence. So this may be a little bit weird when you first realize it. You probably understood the rest of these. Maybe this is the first one that seems a bit weird, but here's an example. Houseplants require much care and attention. Similarly, outdoor plants must be cared for properly. So you can see here, it's basically just saying 2 different ideas, but the second idea really goes along with what the first idea was saying. And you can probably just identify this when it happens, like similarly, likewise, those kinds of words. Then finally, we have another idea. This just adds another idea to the list of sentences. It does not necessarily agree with the first idea. It does not necessarily disagree with it. It's just giving another thought. We need to purchase the supplies for the event. In addition, we need to finalize the guest list. So it's just 2 separate things. They don't necessarily have any connection with each other. They're just 2 ideas. In addition, moreover, furthermore. Now, if you see a random transition word or phrase that you just do not know, a really good trick that you can use is this. Just pretend like you have a random sentence. Like let's just say, Mission 1400 Plus is great for the SAT. And just put in that transition word that you're seeing as one of the choices. So a big one that may be confusing to you that I've seen before is the word fittingly. So what does fittingly mean? What does that transition word mean? What you should do is just put it in and just think to yourself, what would make sense for the sentence that comes after this? Mission 1400 Plus is great for the SAT. Fittingly, it sounds kind of like positive. It sounds like, okay, something that, fits the first sentence. So fittingly, many students have improved their scores with it. That makes sense. Yeah, fittingly, that sounds right. So if I've never seen this word before, at least that seems like a good guess for what that can mean. Another word I really see a lot of students talk about is that said. So let's say we have that said in a sentence. Mission 1400 Plus is great for the SAT. That said, so that seems like, different direction. Seems like it's something off. So it kind of maybe works like, however, that said, it doesn't work for everyone. Something like that. So yeah, that would definitely work. Furthermore, Mission 1400 Plus is great for the SAT. Furthermore, it can help many students. Yeah, that sounds about right as well. Now, full disclosure, I did not come up with this technique myself. I learned this from James Liu, which is another SAT tutor on YouTube, but it just was such a good idea that I felt like I had to throw this in there because really, if you know anything about transition words or anything about English in general, this probably is going to help you whenever you see a weird one that you're not familiar with. So let me just quickly do a few more examples. And I'm just going to follow the exact same process that I already showed in this video. And the only thing that's going to change is that now maybe I'll use some of these things here that I discussed for like my prediction and for when I'm talking about the choices. Geese migrate thousands of miles between their summer breeding grounds and their winter habitats. Okay, so geese are traveling really far between where they are in the summer and where they are in the winter. Blank, scientists have long been fascinated by the bird's ability to navigate such vast distances without prior experiences. So the scientists think it's amazing how they can go all this way without, any kind of prior experience of doing it. They just are built with this ability. So if I had to make a prediction here, I probably would guess something maybe along the lines of emphasis. They're saying that so there's some phenomenon, and then as a result, it's so amazing that, this is happening. Indeed, in fact. So something like that. So let's see, is there something like indeed here? For this reason, nevertheless, similarly, meanwhile. Honestly, there's not a word exactly like indeed here. When this happens, you just kind of go for the most similar word that is actually there. You may not always be able to find an exact match. Sometimes maybe your prediction may even be a little bit off. So for this reason, that seems like a good choice for here. It's maybe a slightly different category. It's more like cause and effect rather than emphasis, but they are pretty similar categories for sure, so it works. Next example. When a city launched a weekend ferry service to reduce traffic, some commentators predicted that ridership would drop sharply after the first summer. Okay, so they think that they have this new ferry service, and they think that the people who are riding it are going to decrease a lot after the first summer they do it. Blank ticket sales reports show that many riders continue using the ferry, and total ridership increased over the next several years. Okay, so basically the exact opposite. They actually had more people on it in subsequent years. So it definitely seems like something like however. We're looking for something with a contradiction here. Looking at the choices here, the closest one of that is definitely in fact. In fact, it doesn't really seem exactly like a contradiction, but that is what it's saying, because they're saying that they thought this would happen, but in fact, in actuality, something different happened. Ecologists monitoring a restored wetland found that it reduced downstream nitrate levels by nearly half during spring storms. Okay, so they found that this wetland, it reduced the amount of nitrates that were in downstream, so in the lower part of the river, by half. Okay, so it just reduced the amount of nitrate that was in the river, basically. The city approved funding to restore 2 additional wetlands along the same river. Okay, so the city wanted to add more wetlands because I guess it was doing such a good job. So this definitely seems like a cause and effect type thing. We have this first sentence here that says it's really good, and the second was since it's so good, the city decided to do this. So we're definitely going to go for as a result here. Real quickly, I just want to show you one of the questions I actually missed in one of those live streams. This is a really good thing to see because this is probably one of the harder examples you can see for a transition question, and see if you can figure it out yourself. I was not able to do it the first time I saw it, so yeah. At a large public library, staff members tracked room reservations using separate spreadsheets, phone messages, and handwritten notes. Okay, so they had all these different ways of tracking who was in the rooms at different times. Patrons complained that bookings were difficult to confirm because the information was scattered across multiple systems. Okay, so since there are so many different things, spreadsheets, phone messages, it's really confusing because there's just so much stuff they have to keep track of. Staff members, however, value the flexibility of the old system and worried that switching platforms would slow service. Okay, so the staff members did not want to change. They liked how it was, and they want to keep it that way. Blank, to address the patrons' complaints, in 2022, the library adopted a single online scheduling platform that centralized reservations and reduced double booking. Okay, so they're like, okay, bro, we'll do what you want us to do. We'll switch over to something else. That's fine. So what would be the prediction here? Now that I know what the correct answer is, my prediction definitely would be something like contradiction. However, nonetheless, because we first say here in this sentence that they don't want to change, and then the next sentence is literally like, okay, bro, we're actually going to change. Completely the opposite of what we just said. What I had messed up on in the live stream was I thought it was saying that since there's some people who do want it and some people who don't want it, ultimately they had this compromise where they did this thing. So I thought it was more like a therefore, thus thing. But it is not, because the thing right before it is saying this and then saying something completely in the other direction. So when you have a sentence that's right before that says something different, you should go for something that's just saying a contradiction, just directly. So therefore, nevertheless is the answer. Comment below if you're able to figure that one out. On the more recent SATs as of June 2026, there have been some questions like this, where it's a transition question, but the choices are just really, really long. Thankfully, you solve these the exact same way as the other ones. It just looks a little bit different. It might be a little bit more difficult to figure out, but it just works the same way. And in many ways, it actually is a little bit easier, actually, though, because you have more information you can deal with. For a question like this, we only have 4 words, or I guess 5 words, to deal with. This, we have a ton of different words, so we really will know if one choice is wrong or if one choice is right. Let's solve this one. Researchers studying urban green spaces have found that parks and tree-lined streets can improve residents' mental health and reduce stress levels. Okay, so when you have stuff like parks and trees, people are feeling happier. They don't have as many mental health problems. However, some city planners argue that maintaining large public parks can be expensive and may divert funding from other infrastructure projects. Okay, so though it could have all these good things, people it costs just so much money. How can we get all these parks in when it just costs so much? Many cities are still debating how much land and funding should be devoted to public green spaces. Okay, so people are debating it. Some people think we should, some people think we shouldn't. So I think we just need something here saying like, okay, they're debating it. They're arguing about this thing. Maybe because of these things, as a result, they're arguing. Looking at the choices now, let's see the one that matches. So as a result, that part looks good, but let's see what follows it, because we have to look at the entire choice, not just the first part of it. All cities have reduced the number of public parks they maintain. Okay, so that wouldn't really make sense. Not like all of them have just randomly found the amount of money that they need to do this. B, in addition, some parks contain walking trails and playgrounds. Okay, that doesn't really have anything to do with it. Consequently, balancing environmental benefits with economic concerns remains a challenge. Okay, so that definitely works. So it's saying here there's still this kind of debate. People are arguing about it, but some people agree, some people don't. If you just look at D real quick, by comparison, rural communities to below property. Okay, that has nothing to do with what we just said. So definitely C would be the right answer here. Sometimes they're not as long though. Let's try this one. For much of the 20th century, archaeologists interpreted massive stone monuments built by ancient civilizations as primarily as demonstrations of political power intended to intimidate rival societies and reinforce elite authority. So like, I'm not sure if you've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, where you have that like big monolith that the monkeys are like playing with and stuff that they talk about for the entire movie, but that's kind of what I think of here. But basically they're saying that when you have those kinds of big, huge statues, it's trying to show power. It's trying to make people scared because they're so powerful, all that stuff. More recent scholarship has suggested that many of these structures also serve important religious, ceremonial, and astronomical functions within their communities. Okay, so contradiction here, we're saying that they weren't just for power, they're also because they had like important roles in the communities. So something like however is my prediction. Looking at the choices here, reinforcing the influence, okay, no, not reinforcing, it's like contradicting basically. Revising this narrow interpretation. Okay, that seems pretty good. Like revising, changing it. Let me just look at the rest of them. Depending on the accuracy of these records, okay, that doesn't really have anything to do with it. Illustrating the scale of these construction projects. Okay, it doesn't really talk about the scale at all. So B would be the right answer here. As I've already hinted at, if you want this full list of all the different relationships, plus also if you want some practice problems that are on this specific thing with the multi-word transition questions, check Mission 1400 Plus with the link in the description. We have a free trial going on where you can access for free for 7 days, so there's literally no reason not to at least try it out if you want to. I'll see you guys in there, and make sure to always stay Gucci.